4th,
This conference will
2023.
now be.
Let's start with a roll call. When
Commissioner Burkholder,
Here.
Commissioner Cable,
Present.
Commissioner Dixon,
Here.
Commissioner Foster,
Present.
Commissioner Horner,
Here.
Commissioner Howard,
here,
Commissioner Lowry,
Here.
Commissioner Tangeman,
Present.
Commissioner Triplett,
Here.
Counselor Oberst,
Here.
Counselor Salinas Oliveros,
Here.
Counselor McKeel,
Here.
Counselor Lopez,
Here.
Counselor Carey will be late, and Mayor Kuntz is excused.
And you forgot me. I'm here.
I had already checked you off, sorry.
Thank you. No
Counselor
worries.
Belts.
Just for the recorded
That's
record.
for last.
Yeah, thank you.
full room. All right. The next item on our agenda is space for public comment. If there's anything that is not on tonight's agenda already or does not involve an active land use application, the public is invited to speak to us for a few minutes if they have an issue to raise. Don't believe we have anybody online either. All right, hearing nothing, we will move on to our work session. This is the TGM code update, our proposed code amendments.
Okay, I welcome everyone. I'll do a quick intro for Sarah and we'll get right into it. I have a lot to discuss, but good evening. Thank you, Council, for joining us at a Planning Commission meeting. This is a joint work session to talk about our very exciting code update project that's been going on for the last 2 years. It's hard to imagine it's been that long. Maybe not for some of you. It does feel like 40 sometimes. So yeah, we've had a number of work sessions to kind of go through different chunks of this code update and dive a little deeper. There were a number of edits that came out of those work sessions with both Planning Commission and Council, and we've had a public meeting. So now the consultant has taken those revisions and edits and put them into this latest draft. So we're going to go through that and get your comments. Move into the next phase. Very important work. Continuing
Suzanne?
their breakdown with OTAC
Suzanne?
with us online. Oops, I didn't see a hand up.
You have a lot of feedback coming through from the city there. I don't know that I'm catching anything.
Yeah, sorry, we're getting some static feedback here too. Hang on for a second while we.
So perhaps if anyone who's not speaking could please turn off their microphone, that might be helpful.
That's much better now. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Hopefully we got that fixed.
I bring these mics with me.
Oh. All righty. So with that, we're gonna go ahead and Sarah has. Oh, sorry, I wanted to point out Ryan is with DLCD. He is also with us in the room. He has the project manager for the state working with us on this. So thank you for him for being here tonight. And I'll let Sarah take over from here. She has a little PowerPoint to share with us. So Phyllis, if you could screen share or allow her to be the presenter,
Yep,
we'll get
I've
started.
got it already. Okay, I assume you all can see that?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. This is our last work session to talk about this enormous amount of code amendments before we move into the public adoption process. So I've got, I'm going to try to keep my presentation really brief so that we can leave time for whatever comments and questions you still have, and whatever discussion we need to have. Just quick agenda. I'll review project objectives. We'll take a super quick trip down memory lane to remind ourselves how we got here. And then I'm going to highlight some of the kind of key code changes that are part of this code package. And this is really just sort of an overview reminder for the group. We haven't identified any like key policy questions or discussion items as part of this work session. And then we'll get into hearing from all of you, and I'll briefly talk about next steps, and we will be done for the night. Way back when we first started doing this project, the city had identified through the TGM grant process some objectives for this work. And those have been sort of the underlying framework for all of the code amendments that we have prepared thus far. We were trying to really infuse some smart growth principles into the code, trying to do some reorganization and some streamlining to make the code more user-friendly, easier to navigate, and easier to interpret. We are trying to make sure that Monmouth can facilitate a full range of housing options for residents. We were looking to make sure that your land use review processes were as streamlined as possible, consistent with state law, and fair and timely, and also making sure that applications were being reviewed at the appropriate level. Excuse me. And then also looking at some design elements to make sure that new development is really bringing forth the type of character that is consistent with Monmouth and with what people want to see there. So how did we get here? So we started, I don't know, everything just is like COVID in my head, but we started probably 6 months into COVID, and I think August 2020 with phase one. That took us about 9 or 10 months. And we, through that process, we did a thorough code audit and created an action plan. And that action plan led into phase two, which we kicked off right around a year ago, where we divided the code amendments into those three packages and actually started drafting the underlying strikeout adoption language. Through that process, we did some community engagement. We did stakeholder interviews kind of at the beginning of phase two. We had some community meetings. We conducted an online survey, and the city had a web page that they kept up to date throughout with all of the relevant project information and opportunities to participate in the process. We also had quite a few work sessions. I think we had 4 planning commission work sessions. There may have been a 5th that I wasn't part of. There were 3 city council briefings, and then we had 2 joint work sessions. And all of that has led us to where we are today, which is looking at the final package of code amendments before they get ready to go to hearings. Just a note, I think I can see most of you on my screen, so if you have a question, I don't know if there's a raise your hand function or raise your hand or just speak up, that's fine too. So getting into some of the key changes, one of the key changes was around housing provision. And there were a whole handful of code amendments that were part of this housing provision element. One of which is that we really opened up the residential zones in Monmouth to allow a broader variety of housing types. So we established housing types that weren't in your code before, things like triplexes, fourplexes, cottage clusters. We did some work around duplexes to make sure that Monmouth is consistent with recent state law. House Bill 2001 requires that in a city the size of Monmouth, duplexes must be allowed anywhere a single detached home is allowed. So we made those updates. We made some moderate density increases for the medium, and high density residential zones. And we updated some of the development standards to facilitate some of the new housing types that we established. And by development standards, I mean things like setbacks, lot coverage, those types of things, lot widths. And we also implemented some new design standards, building design standards for new residential development to make sure that as new homes, new housing comes in, it's meeting a basic level of sort of design quality. We made some changes to your accessory dwelling unit regulations. You already allowed ADUs, and there were regulations for them in the existing code. We initially made some changes to allow more ADUs. We were looking at allowing 2 per lot instead of 1. We revised that back down to 1 ADU per lot based on feedback from this group, basically. And we also made, again, some updates for consistency with recent state rules. We added a whole new section of regulations for food carts and food cart pods. This was something that the city had requested, and we used some sample language and tweaked it to be more appropriate for Monmouth. It's really focused on safety and accessibility, sort of general look and feel, so that these cart pods aren't a major eyesore, so that they're meeting a certain level of aesthetic quality. Things like standards for utilities and lighting. And we also established a review process. So a new cart pod that has more than 3 carts will have to go through a type 2 site plan review in order to be approved. Oops. Wrong button. There we go. We also added a new section of regulations for cottage clusters, which is one of the new housing types that were added in your residential zones. And cottage clusters, just because of the nature of the type of housing that they are, sort of necessitate their own section of development and design standards. And so these standards focus on how the cottage cluster site is laid out and how the buildings are oriented around a sort of common courtyard area. They regulate size and height of the buildings. There's a little bit of some sort of baseline design standards for the cottages themselves. There are standards around where parking can be located, and there are standards for a community building if a cottage cluster has a community building.
Nice.
We made some changes to your parking standards in Chapter 18-130. One of the changes is that the language now allows on-street parking to count toward a minimum parking requirement for residential uses if the street allows parking on both sides and the parking can be accommodated along the subject site's frontage. So if there's parking available and allowed on the street in front of your development, you can count that parking toward the minimum parking requirement. We also included parking standards for the new housing types that we added, and we revised standards for duplexes and multi-dwelling developments. We also revised some of the standards for industrial uses. They were the requirements were pretty high, so we revised those down a bit. And we added some new language for parking determination. So this is a process through which an applicant can request a modification to the minimum parking requirement based on whatever special circumstances they think their development has. They can request a different standard. And in order to do that, they would go through a type 2 process. So it would be going to public notice, and city staff would be making that decision. And if it were appealed, it would go to your planning commission. We made quite a few changes to Chapter 1810, which is the chapter that contains all your sort of procedural language. One of the things we did was add a summary table that includes all the application types, how they were reviewed, and a bunch of other information. Who's the authority, the decision maker, and who's the appeal authority. This was just really one of the streamlining mechanisms so that if an applicant needs, can quickly look at this table and understand what their application type, what the process looks like for that application. We made quite a few updates, again, for consistency with state law. It'd been a while since this section of code had been looked at, so there were some things there that needed to be brought up to speed. We made some sort of streamlining updates. And then 2 new sections in this code, or in this chapter. One is requirements for pre-application conferences. These were already being held by the city. It wasn't in the code. It wasn't codified anywhere. So new language for that lays out what types of applications are required to have a pre-application conference. And there's also an option to waive that conference if you meet certain circumstances. We also added language to require certain types of more impactful developments to hold a neighborhood review meeting prior to submitting their land use application. So those are both new sections of code in that procedural chapter. We took a look at downtown Monmouth. Mostly when I talk about downtown, I'm talking about your Main Street district zone. So we made some updates to the types of uses that are allowed there, including allowing ADUs, food carts, and no longer allowing single-family detached homes. We also changed the language to prohibit new drive-through uses in your Main Street district. Existing drive-throughs can remain. They become non-conforming, so they couldn't be expanded. If they burn down, they could rebuild. And we also added some new and also revised some of your existing design standards for commercial buildings in the Main Street district. And another small change is we added some language to make sure that restaurants and cafes could have sidewalk table and chairs to facilitate some outdoor dining if they wanted to do that. That's it for kind of the highlights. Now is when we can kind of go through and hear your comments and questions. I have the code up on my other screen. I can pull that over so we can all look at it if there are specific sections that people want to talk about. But let's hear from you all. What are your thoughts?
Sarah, do we want to stop screen sharing so you can see the people, like if they're raising their hand and might be easier?
I can see everybody just fine.
Oh, you can?
Yeah, I think what I'll do though is, well, I guess we'll wait and see how it goes. I can actually, yeah, maybe I'll unshare. And then if I need to pull the code up, I can pull it up and share that.
I'm wondering about trying to structure things by going through in sections and letting anybody in a given section, anybody who has a comment in that section. Otherwise, we're going to be back and forth through the whole document all night.
Yeah, I had a similar thought.
Yeah, we could do that. I mean, they're by sections. Do you mean sections of the code itself?
However you want to break it up, Sarah. I mean, it could be by page. It could be by,
I don't know if that's going to work. The sections that we are handed out don't match the sections that we were given to work on. We got package 1, 2, and 3, and they aren't
Right.
in sequence.
we got everything.
At least mine copy
We
was.
have one
Right.
big
Yeah.
copy, so.
We got the same thing.
So we could
Yeah,
do it by
so
we could do it by chapter subsections, but if that proves too complicated, I was going to at least suggest, I suspect we're going to talk about parking. I would recommend maybe we see what else is on the table first, because I imagine those discussions will be shorter, smaller.
Well, I have a question. It's on flag lots, which is 17.25060.
Page 1.
Yeah, that's right on.
Page 1, first page.
well,
And down on the
here's-
bottom where it's sub I and then it's a D. While serving more than one flag lot, the assessed way width shall be divided equally between the lots. Each lot shall provide an access and maintenance easement for its portion of the accessway. My question has to do with the material you gave us back in August 4. Add a little side note to that saying comment. Note for the Planning Commission, Public Works Department will review these standards to confirm they're appropriate. And
Okay.
word for word the same. Does that mean they've done it and there's no change? Or they haven't done it yet, or they don't know about it? Or whatever.
Suzanne, help me remember.
Yeah.
My understanding is
we-
that Public Works has reviewed them, and I did not see any changes from them on that.
Yeah,
piece of
we've
code.
been, keep them in the loop as a interested
thank you.
party. Yeah.
If I could just follow up on that, I was aware of a pair of flag lots sharing a driveway, and one of the neighbors was not very neighborly and seemed to consistently leave the driveway partially blocked with a vehicle. And so is there any kind of reciprocal easement requirement on a shared driveway? And it's just not showing here?
Yeah, that's
Or did
part
I
of
miss
the,
it, which is not
yep, that's
at all outside the,
part of the access and maintenance easement. That's
okay.
just another,
That,
Yeah,
I didn't know
that
if
it's
that referred to
reciprocal.
access for maintenance for,
Yeah,
pipes and wires,
it's-
or
yeah,
that's,
it is a
okay.
reciprocal agreement is
Okay,
how that's written.
good, got
So,
it.
Yep.
I found a typo
Um,
on the next page.
No typos. There can't be
Well,
typos.
this one was kind of funny.
Kidding.
The widow,
Down towards the bottom of page 2,
Uh-huh.
1735, 100, and 5 is red 5 is stricken through, and number 1. The manufactured home shall be certified by the manufacturer to have an exterior thermal envelope meeting performance standards which reduce heat loss levels equivalent to the performance standards which reduce heat loss levels equivalent to the performance standards required of single-family dwellings.
Okay.
So I think
Well,
there's
I
an
feel
added
okay about
phrase.
that because that's an existing typo. I can deal with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and I just, that
Yeah.
was one of the, there are like,
Um,
in this entire document, I found 2. I was amazed. So, good job. I mean, you guys have done amazing work here.
All right, let me make a note of that. Okay.
Does anybody have something before page 17, which is where my
let me
first
just
note-
do one offshoot, if
Okay.
you may humor me.
Uh-huh.
Page 40, up at the top, paragraph G. Since I might
Let me
be
get
having
there.
to interpret this, it says conversion of an existing legal non-conforming structure to an ADU is allowed, provided that the conversion does not increase the degree of nonconformity. What does that mean?
Gotcha. It means that if you have a non-conforming structure, so
Yes.
if you have, for example, a detached garage or a shed that is for some reason non-conforming, you can still convert that into an ADU as long as you don't make it more non-conforming. So as long as you don't put it closer to the setback or somehow, like if you're non-conforming because you're not meeting your lot coverage standard, as long as the ADU doesn't make it bigger and make your lot coverage less conforming. So you just can't make the non-conforming issue worse. That's what it means.
Okay, I'll go.
Are you shaking your head because it doesn't make sense?
No,
Or you don't know
not
what?
to me. To me, it does not, but the
Councilor
majority might
McKeel.
understand it.
Councilor McKeel, you have something?
Just while we're on this page, so you can go ahead and finish with the discussion of item G.
Is it the language that doesn't make sense, or is it the intent of the standard that isn't making sense to you?
Where are we?
It makes
It
sense.
makes
She's
sense.
asking you, Judge Horner.
I understand.
About G.
You're asking me?
Yeah.
I don't understand what it says. Yes, you're right.
Okay. Let's see if I can explain it a different way. If you have, say you have an attached
Well,
garage.
no, we don't need to deal with it. We got other things to go. I'm the
Okay.
lone wolf here.
Is everybody else comfortable with that language?
So Judge, just real quick, if you had a structure in your backyard that was too big and it was non-conforming, but you wanted, but it was considered legal for whatever reason, and you wanted to convert it to an ADU, you could, but you couldn't make it any bigger because it's already too big. And that would make it more non-conforming if you made it bigger. Does that work, Sarah? Is that a fair example?
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Conformance is usually numeric in nature.
Building height, setbacks.
Right, so changing
Square
the use
footage.
of a structure doesn't necessarily make it more non-conforming
Fit in
if
the
you
same
don't
footprint.
change any numeric attributes of the place. All right, I'm pretty sure Judge Horner has told us to move on, so.
Okay. Councilor
Where do you
McKeel,
want
did
to
you
go
have
next?
you had a comment on this page?
Yes, about the recreational marijuana facilities. In the places where you cannot have the facility, it doesn't mention that you can't have it downtown.
Thank you.
We do have that on page 81. Do we need to have that added here?
We have banned it.
Um,
We banned it in the downtown district at council several meetings.
That would be in the use list, right, Sarah? Like when you go to
it's
that
in the use
particular
list
zone.
for the Main Street district. Yeah.
Right. It
So
does show up on page 81. I was wondering if it needed to be here because it was looking at also location or where you can't have it in this section. Just bringing it up, maybe it's fine here. Not anymore.
I don't see a need to put it here because then we would need to list all of the zones where it's not allowed. So I think it's better to keep this language the way it is and use the use tables in your zones to establish where it, which zones permit
Okay.
it and which don't. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you.
Commissioner
Councilor Lopez?
Councilor Lopez.
Oh darn, I lost
Yes,
my
thank
pen. All
you.
right.
Lopez first.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I thought you said me. You said Lopez. Okay. I misunderstood.
Yes, thank you. Page 40 as well. I know that it was mentioned earlier that we had made an effort to conform to state standards. It was brought to our attention at council recently that our hours of operation for marijuana retail facilities were different than OLCC standards by a couple hours on weeknights.
Are they more restrictive or less restrictive?
We're more restrictive.
Okay. Then that's probably okay. You can't be less
Okay.
restrictive than the state law, but you can be more restrictive.
Gotcha.
Point being, we may take it up to change at some point
Yeah,
in the foreseeable future. We have not discussed the issue yet. It has just been brought to our attention.
Gotcha.
Okay, great.
Oberst.
Councilor
Councilor Oberst.
Page 17 and 18, you've got some stuff about timing requirements, and you note that if it's a 120-day period, and if notify planning commission by the 95th day if there's a conflict, they have to set a special meeting. And on page 18, you have council needing to set special meetings, and that implies they have to set a special meeting, even if there is a meeting available within the time period required, already schedule the standard meeting with room on the agenda to take up this issue. And so I'm wondering if each one of those needs a clause that says, or at a regular meeting.
Okay, so I see that language here. Planning commission shall set a time.
I'm looking at H sub I.
Yeah.
Staff shall
that's
notify
here.
planning commission of
Yeah.
time conflict by the 95th day. And then if you turn the page to 18, it is F sub I or sub 1. And again, it calls for a special council meeting. And if we don't need a special one, I want to make sure that we aren't forced to have a special meeting we don't need to have, because there's notification requirements, it cost money and everything else. So if we can get away without a special meeting, there would probably be benefit to that.
Could we solve that by just taking the word special out?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Yeah.
I think we would.
Set a time for a meeting.
Yeah, set a time for a meeting.
Yeah, because
that
we
works.
could say it's in our regular meeting.
Okay.
You're better at this than I am, Sarah.
Lots of practice.
And as long as we're right here, page 20,
Actually, John, I've
oh,
related to the meetings. I had a clarifying question. Sarah, if you could help me understand for the type 2 actions, which could be planning commission, but could also be city staff. I'm not quite certain whether running to the 95th day, it has to be moved to a planning commission decision, or if it can stay with city staff, because this makes it sound like if we're running out the clock, it has to go from a city staff decision to a planning commission decision by holding that meeting.
Where's the language?
Yeah, I think that it's
17.
trying to exhaust the appeal to the planning commission. A type 2 would normally be appealed to the planning commission.
Right.
And so if you're running up against the clock, you want to be able to issue the city's final decision at that highest level, in which case for a type 2, that would be the planning commission.
Right.
I think it's just trying to expedite getting
Okay.
to that next review
But that's
body.
intentional.
I believe so, Sarah. I don't know if you had a different thought on that.
So 17.
Found it, I found it.
Okay. Yeah, Ryan's agreeing with that too, Sarah.
Okay.
I think that was intentional. We did have Lane Shetterly, I should have mentioned, the
Okay.
city attorney combed through this and made a
course.
lot of edits to our procedural chapter, so we can
Yes,
flag
I
that
do.
for him. And I think Councilor Salinas Oliveros had her hand up on the
Oh, yes, please
thing
go
as
ahead.
well, too.
Yeah, I had the same question that Councilor Lopez had earlier. So we're going to discuss that later in council. So thank you.
I've got something in the same general area, page 20, section 5 and 6. I think the last phrase, the bottom, basically 2 lines of item 5 are reiterated in item 6, structured a little better. So I think there's a piece there in item 5 that needs to get pulled out because it's
Oh,
also item 6.
yeah. Yep. Good catch. Thank you.
I think that's your second typo, and I think I'm out of them now.
Phew.
You
Not
won the
bad.
first 2, you got 1 more.
Okay.
On page 17, and I think it's repeated again a little later, I'll mention it after we discuss it. And towards the top of the page, section F sub 1 sub A, or A and B, I was wondering, this is probably standard language, but the use of or for the conditions as opposed to and, it would seem to me that protection for the public and fulfillment of need would make more sense than one or the other. I assume we would always want to protect the public and we would always want to fulfill a need.
Yes, I see what you're saying. I think the way it's worded that way is that it doesn't necessarily have to be both. You don't have to impose a condition that is both in order to protect the public and
Oh.
fulfill the need for public service. So I think that's why they use
I see.
or. It
Okay.
could be both, but you wouldn't, if you had an and in there, it could be interpreted that a condition had to meet both of those.
Thank you. I am reading it more clearly now.
Okay.
And before we jump on, just one more point in subsection 3 of that same point F. We mentioned the planning commission a few times, and again, this is a type 2 decision, so sometimes it's a planning commission, sometimes it's city staff. I just don't know if that language kind of lines up with the intention.
You're right. That should be, because the only reason it would go to the planning commission is if it was elevated. So at this, yeah,
It makes
you're right.
the point more complicated, but just for clarity.
You know, it should be staff, not planning commission. Thank you.
Or you could just say city instead of planning commission.
Yes.
Or city.
Just
Yeah.
say city. Yep. All right.
Any other, while we're
I have
at
one-
the beginning, oh,
You mentioned of typos and John's quiet, so I'm going to add this one. On page 93 under subsection II, it discusses widows, transparent ones.
Oh,
transparent widows.
Oh, wait
All
a
right. Let me let me get down there.
Oh, window.
Windows.
Yeah. I'm guessing I meant windows. Let's see.
Wow, this is social engineering. Yeah.
I don't
seen the
see that
transcript.
on page. Can you tell me what section you're in? Because I think my page 99 is
93, and it's
C
up
Sub
at the top
two.
on subsection II.
Transparent
sorry,
window.
did you say page 93?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
Our
okay.
page.
Uh,
Up above, second paragraph, second word.
this is not the right, I'm not looking at the right page.
I don't see
Can you tell me the
transparency.
section of code? Can you tell me the
It's
section
C
of code?
transparency.
It is.
Section 2.
It's double I.
Right, but
Working backwards,
I,
it's
yeah.
18.90.090, but that's like 2 pages prior.
That's what I needed
Architectural
though. Thank you.
guidelines and standards.
Yeah. Okay.
And then you just went
Um,
past it because there's the picture of the nice little building with striped awnings.
It's before that.
Yeah, it should
That
C.
just-
You know
yeah,
what? I'm just going to search
No, there
for
you are.
widow.
Yeah, there it is.
There it is.
Transparent windows.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you.
Good
Got
one,
it.
Judge.
That's
all right, we have another
Finish
raised
that.
hand online. Councilor
Councilor
McKeel,
McKeel.
go ahead.
Okay, sorry, gotta click that mute thing. I'm sorry to have you go back to 23. I didn't get in there when you were up closer to the top of the document. But it looks, starting on page 23 and going to page 24, when you look at the sections, on page 23, in section 4, it has item A, B, C, D, and then E on page 20. And then the next one, the specific district standards is crossed out, and the next one is A.
Oh,
So,
that cross out is just an error. That should be an underline.
okay,
Yeah. Thank you.
yeah.
There we go. It should look like, yeah. So let's just, I want to go back and check. Are there any other comments on the land use actions section, chapter 1810? If we can, we'll try to go in order here if we can.
I think I have one more right towards the end of 1810.
Parking
But this is our
determination.
page 27. So
Okay.
this is 1810 150
Mhm.
E4. Where we're talking about the evidence that the applicant provides for parking reductions.
Okay.
Identify factors specific to the site, etc. I was kind of surprised that none of the evidence included like proximity to transit provided by the applicant, and I thought that might be something to append to that point.
Gosh, I feel like we had a conversation about this. Maybe Suzanne and Ryan can help me remember. I think that was in there at one point and we took it
We do
out.
have this. We do have the city planner taking transit into account, but in terms of examples of evidence for reducing parking from the applicant,
Oh,
it's
okay.
not present.
Yeah. We can certainly add that. That's an easy add and it makes sense to me unless there's any objection because this is again supporting data may include. It's not a list of required
True.
elements, but it's something that they could use to justify a modification.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I do seem to remember we had the conversation about close to transit as well as opportunities for bike share, those kinds of things. If the owner were going to offer those, there may be an opportunity to reduce the parking requirement based on them offering bike share or those kind of things. Now, I don't know if it ever made it in here, but we did talk about it at council. I talked about it. Don't know if anyone else did,
Wait a minute,
but
transit and you?
me?
Really?
No.
Okay. Is there anything else in 1810? All right.
Anything in 1815, zone changes and plan amendments, or 1820 variances?
What page you see on?
So 1820 starts on page 29.
Okay.
Nope.
schools, college medical centers.
Any changes to the use categories, chapter 1827, starting on page 30? Counselor McKeel?
Yeah, I'm not as good at catching those typos John did, but you have photography studios listed in both service and office. I have page 30 and page 31 on this. Is there a reason you would have them in both? I'm just like, cleaning up the document. Maybe there's a reason.
So I see here under personal service oriented, we've got oh wait. Are you talking about photographic studios?
Mhm.
Yeah, and there's, I didn't list the item numbers, but it's under service.
Personal service oriented.
Yeah,
I see photographic studios, and then under office.
there's also photographic studios, but it's a slightly
Oh,
different language.
yeah,
Portrait photography studio.
Portrait photography studios.
yeah.
Of
Um,
vegetables, you can't do that in that district. Only portrait.
I mean, maybe you see the benefit of having them listed under both. I was just wondering.
no, I don't. I think that's more an oversight. I would be tempted to leave them in retail sales and service, I think, and take them out of office.
Yeah.
That's
Makes sense.
that's kind of what I thought as well.
Okay. I'll make a note here. Let's see. Okay.
On the topic of photography studios, not all photography studios would necessarily be retail. So like a commercial photographer that's photographing, photographing handbags or something along those lines, they would operate more like an office environment as opposed to a portrait photographer that would operate in more of a retail environment, people coming and going. I don't know if that was part of the intent of putting them under both.
That's a good point, Chris.
It is a good point. However, this is also a list of examples. It's not meant to be exhaustive. So
And it just says retail sales and service. It doesn't say like a retail location.
I'd like to just comment that I really am happy to see this kind of list that says examples. We had a case at council several years back where the question was PT Northwest on Main Street a doctor or medical facility? And the planner held that it was not, and council held that it was. And so, that was such a fine hair to split because we had a very specific list of things that could be on Main Street. And a therapy office was not on the list. So I appreciate the work that's gone into coming up with example lists rather than inclusive, exclusive lists that we had before.
Except those examples should be realistic. A zoo and theme park and amusement parks is
well, you already had
not
us
realistic.
remove the marina a few meetings ago.
We did.
One
we
never
did.
knows.
I did. We did quite a few updates to try to make them, to take out the ones that were very, very unlikely.
Right.
I mean,
So,
as
but yeah, I mean, there are some that are.
I'm going to work on getting a zoo in here then.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Hey, petting zoos are a thing.
We had a guy who was interested in a polo facility.
To me, you give ridiculous examples and you set a bad example for the city. I'm just sort of take that personally that way. And then there's other examples through here.
On the topic of the photography, cleaning up the photography language, might I suggest that we place portrait photography studios specifically under the retail sales and service, the personal service oriented, as opposed to photography studios as an overarching.
I would trust the photographer on council to have a good perspective on that.
Can I ask?
Yes.
For my category, we just list flowers as plants? Is that, you don't want to put a florist in this category or not? I'm just asking.
A
It
florist
doesn't
seems like
matter
a
to me.
pretty obvious example. What's the example that they have in place of it at the moment?
All I can see here is plants.
Plants. Okay.
Well, so but it's a very long sentence, but it starts out stores selling, leasing, or renting business goods, including art supplies, bicycles, plants. So that would be a florist. It's you have to go all the way back and read the first part of the sentence.
Okay.
It's referring to a store that sells plants, which is also a
Good
florist.
florist
I
in there.
might almost wonder if taking the word including doesn't suggest that that's a list, and saying, for example, would be more in keeping with the way we're trying to structure this thing.
Or maybe like such as.
Yeah,
That sounds
because if you say including, then that means if you're not on the list, you don't get in.
Yeah.
Sorry, Maggie, you're going to have to move
Again.
no.
again.
We went through that
Take your
once.
pretty
Let's not do
facade
it
with
again.
you.
Yeah. And your Christmas lights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else in use categories?
Doesn't matter.
Sorry, Sarah, what was that?
I just was asking if there were any other comments in the use categories chapter.
Looks like we can probably move on.
30.
Okay. Next up is chapter 1830 special use standards. Most of this is existing language that we
Right.
didn't do a whole lot to. Councilor Oberst, I see your hand up.
So on page 36, 1830, point 30 has been stricken out and it's been replaced with a red 3.
Uh-huh.
A and B, one says no sign can be used over a nameplate 2 square feet in an area for a home occupation. Then it says there's no display that will indicate. Well, a sign is a display. And so either I can have a sign or I can't have a sign.
Okay, yeah, this is existing language. We didn't
I know.
do anything to this. So it's saying that you can have a home occupation under if you meet these following conditions. No sign is used other than a nameplate, not over 2 square feet in area. Any sign shall be a wall sign. There is no display.
No display
There-
beyond the
yeah.
above sign or something like that.
There may be, I don't know if your code defines display differently from sign, but I think that an easy fix would just to be to add other than the sign allowed in A or something. Just to clarify or take
Yeah,
out any.
this is a clarification. And then on
Mm-hmm.
page 37, we have a list of things that are, and this is 1830.040, 4C, which are things that are prohibited in home occupation. And then I go down to the next section, 1830.55, which is now become section 5, home occupation complaint and enforcement procedures. And it seems that the only complaints that are being taken are about 18.30.030, and there is no process for complaining about 18.30.040 that I can find.
That would just be a code violation because it's not allowed, right? So
Right.
they shouldn't be doing it. So we just have to go through
Okay.
our normal code enforcement if somebody wasn't following another rule or section. So,
Okay.
yep. I think we're good. I think it's covered under our regular code violations language earlier in the general standards.
Okay.
Got it. Yeah.
Other comments in 1830 special use standards?
Just one last thing. We have wireless communications facilities on page 38, 18.30.020. We now have community Wi-Fi, and does that qualify as a wireless communication facility? And if so, it's not allowed in public parks, but we have Wi-Fi in the downtown park. So is a Wi-Fi service a WCF or is it not? And if not, then maybe it needs to be spelled out.
I assume it is not. I don't have the definition for a WCF
Okay.
pulled up, but I can pull it up really quick.
I
I'll
just-
search for it if you want to keep going, and then we can come back to that maybe.
Thank you.
I just wanted to
But
make
before we
all
keep going here, the home occupation complaint and enforcement procedures that Councilor Obers was just speaking on, 5A referencing 18.30.030. We've renamed that section. It should be 18.30.010.
Right.
It should be referencing 18.30.010.
Yep, you are correct. A good time to also note that,
That's the whole section.
yeah, that we'll be going through and doing like a tech edit to check for all code references to make sure that everything gets updated, because there's probably more of that in here, and that's a step that usually happens at the very end, but will happen. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, that actually does cover what Counselor Oberst was asking about, because now that whole section is one section. It's not two separate sections any longer.
Right.
So now the complaint would be anything within that whole section. So
Perfect.
it does resolve that issue.
So the definition of a
count.
wireless
job.
communicate
Go ahead.
the definition of a wireless communication facility is an unstaffed facility for the transmission or reception of radio or microwave signals, used for communications, usually consisting of an equipment shelter or other enclosure, a support structure, antenna, or other devices, or an antenna attached to an existing structure. My interpretation would be that your Wi-Fi service does not.
This seems to be referring to,
So
to a tower.
This is a tower.
Yeah,
Like the one-
this is
I
intended
know.
to be
I'm
specific
just
to
saying.
towers.
So the
Perfect.
community
Yeah.
Wi-Fi
that
exists
tower in
of
your
a
backyard?
post. It's not necessarily a tower, but there is a physical structure there. It is a post about 4 feet tall and about maybe 12 inches in diameter. Maybe it's 18 inches in diameter,
And it also uses radio waves.
and it does use radio waves. Yeah, so
But
it
doesn't have an equipment shelter.
The height of those are much higher than 4 feet. They're probably 12 to 15 feet tall,
Right.
and probably a 8 by 10 box on them. They are electrically charged, and they also have the Wi-Fi hooked to them. And they're throughout the city. They're not just city parks. There's some on Eccles.
And
So I mean, they're out there. There's no fencing around them. There's no. I mean, it's a.
But we're specifying that
breaking
it
our
can't be in the park.
We're breaking our own.
So I guess what the question is, do we need to make the WCF standard a little more explicit about scale?
That's what I'm thinking.
Yes.
Although we're moving towards cell systems that are going to use small
Right.
units mounted on
I know.
buildings that repeat short range.
And then the question is, is that a problem?
Right. And if you were to explicitly separate out Wi-Fi for internet connections for computers and telephones, that would, and say those do not count as WCFs. It's cell systems and microwave systems.
Well, speaking as a technologist,
No, right.
I
Thank you.
would hesitate to bake too much technology into our definitions. I think what we want to do is, what do we object to when we're talking about these towers? And I think, unless somebody has another idea, it's scale. It's a matter of having this massive tower next to another use.
Super physical.
Well, and before we get too much further down this path, this probably isn't something that we're going to solve with this code update. It's too late in the game to start looking at a new topic.
Yeah.
And it's pretty out of scope for this work. So
Okay.
I think that's one that's going to have to be marked for a future update. And it sounds like it's going to need more discussion.
Steel tree.
Okay, fair enough. All right, shall we move on?
Food carts.
All right. I heard somebody say food carts.
Go ahead.
I thought at the planning commission when we were discussing this, at least I suggested it, so I just assumed everybody agreed.
We usually do, Judge.
That under the utilities, it just they have to be connected to the city utilities. And here we go into different, some community wastewater holding tanks and stuff like, what else? There's the, anyway, I thought it was just going to be that you require that the food cart connect to the city utilities and let it go with that.
I do think that's the
I
language you
think
looked
this
at.
was an attempt to make that a little bit more flexible, you know, to allow other options other than connecting directly to the city's system. I think it's just intended to provide some more flexibility for other circumstances.
Well, I don't think I didn't think they needed that. The homeowners have to all hook up, so everybody else should all be hooking up to the city and not go nickel dime different little changes that I assume the utility department, somebody's going to have to approve these. Might as well make it as simple as possible and do whatever the city requires of the local restaurants.
Well, under 6, utilities, 6C, it says food carts and amenities shall connect to a power source. Does that mean that they could have a generator and that's all they need?
Generators are prohibited.
It says generators are prohibited, so no,
Yes.
we wouldn't want them to have a generator.
So then it would, yeah, they would have to connect to some power source and it would have to be city power then.
Well, it could be solar panels and a battery.
They could have a
That's true,
battery.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to
Again,
figure
I mean,
out.
you know, the intent is to, is to make it a little bit easier for somebody to have a food cart than it would be for them to
Yeah.
have a restaurant, right? I mean, it's
I'm all
about
for it.
providing some flexibility. So,
Hamster wheel power.
There's a food cart down in the Independence Plaza that comes and goes. And if they had to, every time they came in, hook up to sewer and water and electricity, they wouldn't be there. That business wouldn't exist. And they have the internal capacity to supply potable water and collect anything
They
that
have a
goes
dry
out.
tank
And they have a propane tank, and they've got, you know, whatever source for lights. I'm not sure. And maybe they've got a generator, and that wouldn't be allowed in mine.
No, but
But you know, one of the things about some of those food carts is they do move.
they do.
You know, some of them are put in RVs, for goodness sakes. And there's also the notion that you might want to try a small food cart pod without the expense of digging into sewer and water systems. And when it succeeds, then you say, this is great, we need to get hooked up.
Permanent.
So the city can get hooked up.
Yes, this is new language from the last time we saw it. And I guess the question is the new language a problem, or are we comfortable with the new language?
I like it.
Yeah, it was fine.
Yeah,
So you're looking at page 43, number 6 is what you're looking at?
Yes.
I think it leaves the flexibility that a food cart would need.
Well, they're connecting to the sewer. They're connecting to the, there is no give and take there.
Well, it's either they're connected to the sewer or they're using their own, an individual or community water holding tank. So
Right.
there are 2 options there.
Serviced by the Oregon Department
Consistent
of
with-
Environmental Quality.
Applicable.
They got to be serviced by the DEQ.
A licensed pumper.
Well, comfort, but still, they still have to be licensed.
Right. They do.
So, whatever.
Have health and safety standards.
Yeah.
Regardless. Yeah. Okay. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads to leave this as it is.
Okay.
So I think we can move on.
I'm going to skip annexations and definitions unless anybody has comments under 1840 or 1845, and then we can move into the residential zones.
Give me a minute to catch up, Sarah.
Sure.
Not a lot of changes here.
This is a general question on, I think I know the answer to, but I want to check. Duplexes, can you have separate ownership of the 2 halves, or is it still
Yes.
one owner for the whole property?
They can condominium.
You can have,
common
yes,
property
you can
line.
have separate owners.
Yeah, it's still one parcel, but then they create condo inside the units. They can.
Okay, that's what I thought I remembered, but I was not sure about that.
Not many do that because it's kind of a hassle.
Okay.
It's super complicated, yeah.
As a duplex, you can. Sell off the side.
Are you on page 49 yet?
So I am, yes, I'm into the residential zones, chapter
Um,
1850.
I brought it up also at the planning commission, and it's still here. And it's also apparently in the state statute. And you asked one of your cohorts to explain it because it didn't make sense. I agree with you. It doesn't make sense. It still doesn't make sense. That the regulated affordable housing, what their definition does not make the housing affordable, although it says so. And I guess you got to go back and forth and figure out what 60% of the median income is and what 80% of the area median income is determined by these other things. Anyway, the statute doesn't seem to make sense to me, and you asked about it, and apparently whatever explanation came, it was fine because it's still here. If you just, it's a long, sort of convoluted
These are the
section.
definitions, right?
Yeah, definition,
Yeah.
page 49.
Definition.
Yeah, page 49 at the bottom of the definition.
I'm sorry, it's on page 49, down, halfway down, regulated affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
We've had the discussion sort of offline amongst counselors about what is affordable
What is-
housing.
yeah.
We don't know.
Well,
There's definitions, but is it
You're
truly
right.
affordable?
Affordable housing is some planning concept. It's not realistic because it's what two seller and buyer can agree to. And
Well, there is an official term for regulated affordable housing that
Which
is
is
intended to keep housing prices for ownership below market rate so that people making a certain amount of the area median income can afford to buy it. So that's kind of what the intent of the definition is. And the definition here is maybe Ryan can help me remember, but I think that this is the sort of the standard definition per the state rules.
I think we're going to LCD, which I was just going to suggest. I bet he knows.
Yeah.
Is this
Ryan's
my-
there, right?
You're on.
Yes,
You're
I
on.
am.
Oh, there he is.
Okay. Hi there. Ryan Markwart with DLCD. And so this regulated affordable housing definition, it's more of a definition of if a housing type meets that definition, it can be allowed in certain places, in certain zones. So it's not saying that all regulated affordable housing meets that definition. It's just,
does anybody know what 80% income, 80% of the area median income is determined by the Oregon Housing Authority Stability Council based upon information from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development?
We can look
How
it
much,
up.
what's that dollar figure?
We can look it up.
Yeah, that's
Something that
we got
would be determined on a case by case basis as the development came in.
What's
So the
it today then?
Don't know.
Affordable housing, if you look at the one in Southtown down here, the ones that's built with 125 units or whatever, that's affordable housing because the people in there are getting subsidized by the federal government. So that's affordable. This doesn't mean that I'm going to own it. A corporation owns it and they're renting to you based on your income. It's the way I would look at it. That's the way it's handled.
So they
not
met this criteria.
So they met the criteria, but Mr. Horner owned the property, all of them, and he's sending up and renting them out to us, and I have to meet the government qualities or government criteria to be able to rent there.
That's not true. I don't own it.
Well, I know you don't, but
You mean
you were the closest. I do.
Yes.
You were the closest. So I mean, that's the way affordable housing would work.
Or if we set some kind of requirement that said X number of homes in this new development must be affordable, then that,
That's a whole different program.
okay, that's what I'm asking.
These people are not buying the house then.
No, they are not.
renting.
They're renting it, and they
Okay.
must
Yeah,
meet
these-
government
It says
standards.
to own or
And
rent.
you could conceivably have purchasable properties that would be considered affordable. You could have that as a standard in development and say in this new zone we're going to create, or
Not that
we will
have,
give a city subsidy
but-
if you kind of
Yes.
thing. And Suzanne has.
Yeah, well, sorry. So, I mean, this is like, this is a big issue, right? Affordable
Yeah.
housing. So just to kind of bring it back to the context of this code change, the state legislation came across trying to create more affordable housing opportunities. They developed this particular definition of regulated affordable housing so that we could allow that type of housing in some of our commercial zones. So that's the context of this definition. So they have to, those two work together. So there are a bunch of different definitions of affordable housing. For the purposes of this code update, it was state legislation that created that. So just wanted to frame that up. Hopefully said that okay.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Yep. So it's
Okay,
here
can we
to
move
align
on
with state
to,
standards.
should we move on to the residential zones?
Certainly.
So 1850, starting on page 50. Counselor Lopez, you had a question, comment?
Yes, thank you, thank you. Requesting a word change here. If we look at page 50, this is item 4A. It currently reads the physical and social integration of citizens, diverse in age, lifestyle, and economic status. Can we change that to residents?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
What do you say?
Changing the word citizens
Citizens to
because
residents.
You don't have to be a
it
citizen
may
to
not,
live here.
not everybody may be a citizen, but they are a resident.
Oh,
But they're using citizen in general, not.
They may be a citizen of the city of the United States.
Correct. So
So we-
that's why we change
So we,
to resident.
that's,
so then change it to residents.
Yes, that's what we're doing.
yeah,
That's the
Not
plan.
and change the word.
Any other comments in this chapter, residential zones? Counselor Oberst, is your hand?
So, you started out, Sarah, at the beginning by saying that we were going to have moderate density increases in RM and RH. And I look and I see we're going in RM from 7 dwelling units to 16, which is better than doubling the density. And in the MX zone, we're going from 9 to 20, which is better than doubling, which I don't personally consider a moderate increase. That is a decision that, I will defer to wiser minds than mine.
Can we,
I do have the
let's
concern.
back up a second though. So right now the maximum density for your RM zone is 12 units per acre.
Okay, I'm sorry. I
and
see
we're
now
bumping
what I
it
misread.
to 12. Yeah,
Thanks for fixing me.
sure.
Um,
And then, okay, go ahead.
The question I do have is in the RS zone, where we're now required to allow duplexes, but they don't count as 2 dwelling units, they only count as 1. And if I put in the maximum allowed 6 dwelling units and they're all duplexes, that's really 12. And so now I'm in single family, I keep trying to not use that term. I'm in RS, but I've effectively got a density that's starting to creep towards RM. And I don't know that there's a solution to that given the state mandate to allow duplexes, but that's just a concern. And if we have a development go in with utility sizing to handle 6 dwelling units per acre and suddenly we've got 12, who pays to upsize?
It would seem to me by definition, a dwelling unit is 1 unit. So that would be half of the.
It's not defined that way, and the state does not allow us to define it that way. A duplex is
1 unit.
And that is just, I'm stating this as a concern. This is for DLCD and the new governor as much as anything. I believe that this is a really harsh rule going forward, and it's going to cause problems. Just like I worry about if a bunch of ADUs went into a neighborhood whose services were barely adequate, who pays to upsize the sewer and water? Where does that money come from? And I don't know. I'm asking you, you don't know either.
Yes, he does.
I'll respond as briefly as I can. Yes, this is kind of a paradigm change to how density is calculated, and Monmouth is not different from a lot of cities that are wrestling with this right now. I agree with you. Point taken. And there's kind of a case working through LUBA right now about how a city is conditioning a single family residential subdivision in trying to consider whether units are going to be single family or duplexes, and how much you can ask developers to upsize, what assumptions are valid. So those are all questions that are very good, astute questions. I don't have a good answer to them, and some of that's just kind of working its way through the legal process right now too.
And I'm wondering if those questions were asked at the legislature, and if they were they hand waved or not? I don't know. And I know
Not
you
sure.
probably don't either. So,
Could we put an
thank you.
Could we put an asterisk statement someplace that allows us to be a lot more flexible?
I'm sorry, start.
A statement with an asterisk on it that says except for, or
I think we're kind of stuck with.
We're
the
locked-
state.
we're
Not
locked in
not
with
for
the state standard.
duplexes.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
for duplexes. The state laws is pretty straightforward.
let's turn the page.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just building problems if there's not enough
And
resources.
I don't have an advanced math degree, so I didn't sit down and figure out how many 900 square foot cottage cluster cottages you can get on an acre in resident and single.
16.83.
Is what? You did it, Jeff?
Don't listen.
No, I just made it up.
Okay.
16.83.
And it's, again,
But
it's
you'd
a
believe that,
dwelling
Tom.
unit per acre question of how many of those 900 square foot cottage cluster cottages can I fit in an acre of RS? And my guess is it's more than 6.
Well, along with that situation of doubling and tripling the amount of buildings being built is you're reducing the requirements for parking.
Right. No,
We've gone through this and the council has gone through it and most of the commissioners here have gone through that. And we battled for quite a bit of time to get where we are. And now they're taking all of that away and it doesn't matter. And as I said to these people, said before, it may never ever affect me, but what affects me, we're here what affects the citizens as a whole. And by reducing the number of parking spaces, people, you're just looking for trouble. We went through this already. Let's not go back through it again.
We will definitely go with parking.
So I guess that's a question because I don't know what amount of time we have allotted for this evening or what the expectation is about when we're going to wrap up.
9 o'clock.
But
Turn into a pumpkin.
sorry.
Go ahead. You're fine.
So I know that there's a parking conversation that needs to happen tonight. So I guess what I'm saying is, should we do it now? In the interest of making sure that we have that discussion before we're done tonight. Are we wrapping up at 9? Is that the goal?
Yes.
Or
so
by
That is
9?
usually the goal, yes.
Oh,
Okay. Okay.
you're talking about
I think
parking
once
now.
we get out of residential, we're going to pick up speed, Sarah.
Okay. So
Because
let's-
residential is close to everybody's heart.
and it's very much linked with the parking. So okay, so let's get through the residential zones and then maybe we'll jump ahead to parking and have that discussion. So what else in 1850 are people finding?
Under page 450 on 18.50010, under number 4, the mixed density,
Mhm.
does that, whatever's in front of the planning commission, they have to demonstrate that A, B, C, D are all there?
No, these are intent statements. This is just a statement of what the zone is intended to accomplish. So
Yes.
there's no requirement that somebody meet these standards. This is just sort of an explanation about what that zone is and why it's there. So
Well, does number D, is that really helpful, the wording in it?
I guess I'm not sure
Well,
why what the
well, I'm
concern
not sure
is with
why
that
it's
language.
there, so.
Well, again, this is, I know it looks like it's new language, but this is actually existing language that's been relocated. So I didn't make any changes to it. So I assume when that that MX zone was created, and I think some of you might have been around when that happened, that language was put in there. An alternative means of developing land that promotes public health.
And Judge, if you look at Edwards Edition, which is MX, there's everything from 700 square feet to 3,800 square feet over there. And even the smaller houses are going to be fairly expensive and probably not affordable under the standards we saw earlier, certainly not at all income levels. But the MX, you wouldn't see that kind of mixed sizes in a standard RS development. In an MX development, you see typically, Not always, doesn't have to be
Okay.
built this way, but
Okay,
a broad
but-
range of sizes.
Yeah, but the area's got to be open for people diverse in age, lifestyle, and economic status. So then does the developer have to then somehow come up with what the coherent functional, what everybody's going to agree to? Or a majority of the people are going to agree to, of those age, lifestyle, and economic? It just doesn't seem to add anything to it.
These aren't standards. These are
All right.
just like descriptions of what the zones are intended to do. So an applicant, a developer is not going to have to meet this as though it were a standard.
And the word promote is the one word that I think
Right.
really,
Yes, it can promote all A, B, C, D.
well, but it promote or it's a recommendation.
Yeah, a lot of these,
It's a rationale for why we have an MS.
Exactly.
a lot of the purpose statements at the beginning of chapters are context for the planning commission, for people reading the zoning documents to understand the point of all of it, but it's not actually a rigorous standard that people have to meet. So it's
Right.
aspirational, it's a goal, it's why the code is there in the first place.
So the 10-minute biking or walking is going to be okay too.
Do we have anything else for the residential chapter? Okay, I know we want to get to parking and it's getting late. I have one simple question. Page 86, the Main Street District Zone permitted land uses. I'm just curious
What
why.
page?
Sorry, page 86.
86?
Yes, chapter
Jumped already?
1890. I'm curious why the downtown zone didn't get a table the way the other commercial zones and residential zones got a table. Because it seems like
Yeah,
the same sort of information.
we talked about that. We combined the other commercial zones because they were much more similar in a lot of ways. This Main Street district really was such a standalone zone in kind of its uses, its standards, what it was doing. It didn't make sense to combine it with the commercial zones. And we talked about this a long time ago. So because we didn't combine it with the other commercial zones, we didn't put this in table format because it didn't seem to make sense to have a
Okay.
standalone table for just one zone, basically. There were just too many things that were unique about this zone that it made it more complicated to combine it than not combine it.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right. Is there anything burning before we get to parking?
One last question, page 55, and this is educate me. 18,
Can you give me a section? Yeah.
Yeah, 18.50.050, building and site design standards.
Okay.
Number 4, entry location, A,
Mm-hmm.
be set back no further than 20 feet from the abutting public street or public sidewalk.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand why I can't have a front door that's 21 feet from the street or more. Why am I forced to be within 20 feet of the street with my front door, where my current front door is about 50 feet from the street? And I know that it wouldn't apply to my house, but I don't,
Right.
I understand trying to increase density, reduce sizes of front yards, bring dwellings closer to the street to feel more neighborhood, more eyes on the street, more pedestrian friendly. But if I have a design that puts the front door farther back than that, I don't understand 20 feet. Why that's an important enough standard to put in here.
Well, it's for the reasons that you just said. It's about the eyes on the street. It's about bringing buildings a little bit closer to the sidewalk, so you feel like you have this sort of more traditional walkable neighborhood. Entrances that are set very far back off the sidewalk don't feel as welcoming, and you don't have the transparency. So that's why that standard is there. It doesn't mean you couldn't have an entrance that's further back, but you have to have at least one that's within 20 feet.
Right, no, I got it.
Yeah.
And, I'm going to kind of wrap around to the parking piece, and we're talking eyes on the street, and then we're going to park everybody on the street so we can't see up and down the street because there's cars parked everywhere, but that's just. Yeah.
Anything else before we move into parking?
More pleasant or not.
I didn't hear that.
I don't see any other issues being raised before we get to parking now.
Okay. So parking is section 18130. I just realized why my page numbers are different from your page numbers, but that's okay.
Starting on
So
page 101.
well,
101.
yeah, I realized earlier today that I hadn't the existing commercial industrial zones that are just showing up as deleted language aren't in the version that you guys have, and I added them back
101.
in. That's why my page numbers are off.
101.
So yeah, it sounds
There
like
it
you're
is.
page 101.
Page 101. Page
It's where,
101.
okay.
It's page 101.
It's page 101, Judge. Took me a while to find it.
Okay, since we'll probably have a lot to talk about, let's start with section 030. Are there any notes about section 030? Anything about 040?
If I could just go back real quick.
Yeah.
So I need a clarification. Are we in fact saying that you do not have to have off-street parking in RS? Is that
Sarah,
part of
could
the
you?
standard? I didn't see it, but I can't say that honestly that I was reading every single word as closely as I might.
Or Sarah, maybe you can point out where that is?
Yeah, so 18130.030 under 7,
Okay.
A and B. So for dwellings, so any dwellings in any zone, required parking has to be on the same lot, or it can be on the street if it's directly in front of the building or on a street frontage for that building. And parking is allowed on both sides of the street. So
we're
it's not
basically-
saying that you don't have to have off-street parking in your RS zone. It's just saying that you can count on-street parking toward the requirement if on-street parking is available along your frontage.
So basically, if I have enough room in front of the lot for 2 cars, that covers it, and I don't have to build garages on my new houses or driveways.
If your
Because-
parking standard is 2 spaces, then yeah.
What's that?
If your parking standard would be 2 spaces and you can fit 2 spaces in front of you on the street, then yes.
And as I say, there goes eyes on the street because you can't see past all the cars in the street. And it's extremely counterproductive to what we're trying to do with walkability and bicycle ability to have people parking every car they own in the street. And I think it's a mistake. I think it's a big mistake.
I'm sure we're going to have lots of opinions on parking, but something to consider is actually not necessarily for cycling, but pedestrians often appreciate a line of steel down the street to separate them from the moving traffic.
My wife won't walk between a hedge and a row of parked cars.
Interesting.
Okay, because it is so confining.
Okay.
Okay, and that's
Good grief.
at least when she's walking along.
So I guess one of the first points of discussion is in section 030, which is this issue of using street parking to go towards your parking minimum. I've heard a couple of voices on this subject, but I'd like to hear from other commissioners and councilors as to what they think about this part.
This allows you to use your garage for something other than parking.
Most
Or
a
not
lot of
have a
people do
garage
is
if
is
they
Great
want.
American
They don't want
Storage
you to have
Unit,
a
but they've got a
garage.
driveway that they can park in. They're off the street. I use my garage as a shop. My car parks in front of the garage on the driveway out of the street.
It also would allow a developer to build a home without a garage, period. Without
Without
one
a
at all.
driveway, period.
And without a driveway. That is concerning, as much as I'm opposed to cars in general.
But they're a
But-
reality in
but it is
particularly in a
that's
rural
exactly right.
community. This
That's
is
what I
not
said.
downtown Portland, and we don't have buses coming by every 10 minutes.
I agree.
How does this apply to the Edwards model of having the garages and entrance in the back?
That'd be great.
Unfortunately, the amount of land that requires is more, and most developers won't do what Eric Olson has done, which is spread out the property as he's done.
Make parking this wide behind the house.
Well, the duplexes and triplexes become a problem too, because they don't, I mean, the kids are going to be 4 to 6 in there and they all have a car.
Right.
So you have it all on the street, and they should,
Right.
it has to be, I think, on driveways and not count the driveways, not the streets.
Even on a single or a detached home with a single car garage, you run into they're already using the street
Oh, yeah.
because you can't.
All right.
So then adding this language is just compounding the issue.
Counselor McKeel, did you
Carol,
have a
Chris.
comment?
I would just concur with your argument, with people's comments. And I think as a biker, as a bicycler, not a biker,
Carol, like
having,
Carol.
you know, those Harleys just make me feel so good. So as having a street that is lined with cars on both sides actually makes me pretty nervous as I'm trying to take a bicycle. I actually want to go do the sidewalk, which, you know, I shouldn't do. So I agree. I think there needs to be the off-street parking with the home.
And Counselor Lopez, I think you were next.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be a little contrarian here, and I do this with some reservation because I myself am torn on this, right? Yes, it is a concern forcing everyone to park on the street. I think that, you know, as someone mentioned earlier, you have households with 3 teenagers, and that one household's going to have 5 cars, right? Even under our current code, the majority of those are on the street. The cynic in me suggests that, gosh, most people park on the street anyway. I think someone called the you know, the garage the Great American Storage Unit earlier, Counselor Oberst, and and you know, I know a lot of people who don't park in their driveways. I myself don't have a driveway that I can park in, and you know, I think that there's a lot of folks that, you know, have basketball hoops in their driveways. That's where we're pushing them to put the hoops right now anyway. So there's already a lot of factors that are pushing people to park on the street. I think that most of you know, most vehicles in our town end up parked on the street regardless. Pushing more to the street is concerning, but balancing that, I'm concerned about the amount of space that we're giving cars. You know, building a structure with a home to be able to house a car, right? That increases home prices. We all talk about wanting more affordable homes, yet we're not willing to allow developers to create homes that are affordable, and the cost, both in the cost of the structure and the cost of the space for the things that are devoted just to a vehicle, increases the cost of homes greatly. And so while I certainly don't want to see our streets flooded with cars and every inch of parking be taken up with cars, I'd love to see some avenue to be able to, you know, cut home prices and be able to make some of those homes theoretically affordable for individuals to buy. You know, I think it was a different meeting. Someone had suggested that, you know, we may do this and no one may take advantage of it, because will people actually buy homes without a garage? Heck, I don't know if they will or won't. And maybe that's market forces, and I'm open to letting market forces make some of these decisions. But, you know, I kind of wanted to sum it up. I kind of want it both ways, right? And I think we all want it both ways. We don't want our streets to be flooded with cars and every inch of sidewalk to be taken up by parked cars. But at the same time, we all talk about affordable housing and we want to find a way to do it. And there's an avenue here that opens options up that aren't open now. So that's all I ask, is that we consider this not just in terms of what it does to the vehicles, but what it does to those affordable, potentially affordable housing units. And I will remind everyone of this, one way or another, when we do talk more in depth about affordable housing in future weeks, months, and years.
Thank you. Councillor Selena Oliveros, you had your hand up for a while. Sorry, is it councillor or commissioner?
I don't know. It would be counselor for me,
It's
but
counselor.
yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I
Counselor
thought
for me.
so. I thought so. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm on the same lines as Counselor Lopez. It's a give and take. I share a driveway. We have 3 cars. One of them fits in the garage. The other one I can park in the back in front of the garage if I need to and share that. But it is a give and take. It's how much are we committed and invested to affordable housing? And will people buy homes without a garage? Yes, if it means they can afford it and they have a home for their family, because the car they can park on the street. And yes, it is a concern. I walk my dogs. We go for a walk. Our family does that all the time, and we have to watch where we're going and all of that. But um, this is tough. But again, if what frustrates me is when we talk about affordable housing, but then there's a barrier. But we have to change a code. But we can't do it because of this. And for me, it's like, how many of those buts or how many of those barriers, and then we can still talk about affordable housing. Yes, my family did buy a house. It was a rundown house growing up. It wasn't a very nice home, and we did not have a garage. But my parents could afford that home, and we had to fix it up a lot, and we had to put a detached garage to it eventually. But, if we were forced to buy a home that we wanted with more space, garage, all these things that we're talking about, and not allowed to park on the street, we would not have been able to afford that home. So and maybe this will encourage people to walk more. Maybe this will, so that you don't have so many cars parked, on the street. And we're assuming that everybody has a car. Yes, most people do, but we also have a population that does walk, that does share a car, that can't afford cars, that maybe live, in apartments. And so it's just something to consider. And yes, it's concerning, but where do we draw that line?
Thank you. Councillor McKeel has her hand up, and then I do have a suggestion for a way to tweak this, but let's finish up with your comments first. Councillor McKeel?
Oh, I'd be interested in hearing your suggestion, because I was just going to say all right, I guess I was going to talk. I lived in Adair Homes subdivision that was affordable housing, and we had driveways. So you have affordable homes and have a place that you have off-street parking. And I'm always hesitant to let the market dictate what is available, because I've had to purchase homes that I wouldn't have purchased if there were more options available. So I don't think that we should. I don't know that's why we have codes, right? Is so that we can protect people from having to make choices of what they purchase that they wouldn't want. And I guess I disagree that you can't have affordable housing and have driveways, because I lived in an affordable house in Adair. And then I'm
I
sorry.
didn't say that they were tied together. I just said that it was a thing that could make it more affordable. I was not at all suggesting that they were, mutually.
And I wasn't going to talk very long, and then I did, and I'm sorry for that. I think I'm just getting tired, so I apologize.
So what I was going to suggest, it seems like a lot of the comments that I've heard on this conversation have been focused on the RS zone. So I wonder if we could tweak this language so that this standard applies in the RM and the RH and the
That
and the
was my
MX
point, Sarah.
zone.
That was my point from the beginning. Was my concern was about the RS zone.
Okay. So what we could do is revise this section so that it doesn't apply in the RS zone, so that you
And
could only count on-street parking toward your requirement in other zones, not RS. That would be one approach.
and the suggestion I had to address the affordable, do garages and driveways make houses unaffordable, is if you were to use the earlier definition we had of what constitutes affordable housing and say, if you are building something that meets that definition of affordable housing, you may count on-street parking spaces toward your requirement. And if it is not affordable, if the house is not going to be affordable by the standard stated, you must provide 2 off-street parking spaces. And it may be a headache for my dear friend Suzanne to try to enforce a thing like that.
If I could comment on that real briefly, I was thinking along those lines as well. And then I went to the table on the following page, and it actually has a carve out for regulated affordable housing to reduce their parking requirement slightly per unit. So to me, it was like maybe pick one of the other ones of those.
One or the other.
Yeah,
there it
would
is.
be a good way to do that. But yeah, I think either way, you're trying to give that incentive, right?
Right.
To do the affordable
Right.
housing. So, and using parking as a tool. So yeah, I like.
Before we weigh in on Sarah's suggestion, Commissioner Tangeman, did you have something you wanted to add?
I guess I agree, and I understand a lot of the comments that have been made in the last few minutes. I do want to go back and just revisit the fact that where Monmouth is, most of us need a car to get to anything that we need to do, other than maybe just taking a walk. So it's super important that we keep that in mind, that we are not, surrounded by every single service that is needed for any resident. Garages are a part of safety as well. Kids' bikes, people's belongings. If you don't use it as a garage, it still is a wonderful place to keep the Monmouth Police Department a little less busy in keeping things under wrap, under lock and key, as well as for many, many people, it's a point of keeping them out of the weather, getting into a warm vehicle or whatever, onto a warm bicycle if that means that. I think that some of the decisions that are trying to be made are done before we've even had studies to determine what does it really cost us to put a garage on a home. Yeah. Is it really taking us to a place of making that home unaffordable or not? Or are we just thinking that extra square footage is really putting a big burden on that? I would be happy to find that out from even several builders, a builder that I work with and many other builders that I can touch. But some of these things are, I think, things that we haven't thought about quite enough.
Just out of curiosity, go down to basic. Where is the requirement that a residence have a garage?
There isn't one.
There's no requirement for garages.
Wait. There are too many people answering. Go ahead, Suzanne.
There's no requirement right now for garage.
Okay.
But there is for 2 off-street parking spaces.
Wait a minute. Wait. So that would lead, if there are none, that the builders are building to a clientele that wants a garage.
Right. And they would be free to continue doing so,
Yeah.
regardless of the decision on this point.
Okay.
Commissioner Foster?
It's a question. We made the suggestion we wouldn't, in the the RS zones, we would not make the rest of these be bound by that. But the problem that I have realistically is we had a 2-family dwelling in there at one time, which is a duplex. It said you're supposed to have 4 spaces. Basically, we were saying if you have a bedroom, you need to have a car, or you need to have a space to park a car. That was our basic criteria. And so the rest of this whole thing, but we've kind of wiped that out. I don't know what we mean when we say we'll make it a two space dwelling, 2 spaces per car. But what are we going to do with the rest of them? That was the whole problem when we had people building. So I put a duplex on a corner. What's going to be my requirement? What's going to be my requirement if I put a duplex on the corner?
In which zone?
Well, right now I can put it in an RS zone.
Right.
So what's going to be my requirement?
But you can't require off-street parking for a duplex.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We need to.
You love that.
But I think that is a state requirement.
No, I don't think so.
Am I right about that? That
No.
not allowing, not requiring off-street parking for duplexes is part of the state mandate?
No.
2 spaces. That's what.
Okay. They two for a duplex off-street? Okay.
I mean, you're
Right.
wrong,
Okay,
John.
got it.
Were you wrong?
Pretty much.
And the other question I
Happens,
have,
Judge.
the other question I have is we keep throwing around affordable housing. Well, we got to get down to affordable housing. I would ask, and we had a couple of counselors we had a couple of people talk on that. Can you tell me what affordable housing is? Can anybody here tell me what affordable housing is?
It's an oxymoron.
It doesn't happen.
So
The
we've had this
basic right now, you have to earn, and most here do, I don't, but that's beside the point. Have to make 88,000 a year to be able to buy a house. That's what's out there right now. You have to make 88,000 a year to be able to buy a house. How are you going to do that?
Family.
You got to have a family. So I got to have both people, 3 people in my family working to afford a housing. I think we had one member kind of indicate that's what took place when they bought their house. I don't know how to get around it, but I just think when we start reducing the amount of space in the parking, we're just going to create more issues for the general public than we're going to resolve.
So
Council Lopez has his hand up. Sorry, Commissioner Howard.
No, go. Well,
I think
let's-
Steve had his hand up a long time.
Power of the chair.
I'm happy to hear Councilor Lopez, but in the interest of not extending this conversation too much farther, do we have a feel for whether or not it's a reasonable compromise to take this requirement out of the RS zone as proposed?
I'd say take it
I don't know what it's going to resolve.
Does that simplify things?
I mean, like I say, if I put a duplex in there, what's going to be my requirement? Is it going to be 1 per bedroom? Going to be 4 parking
It'd
spots for
be-
a duplex? I mean,
out. Duplexes
It would
require
be 2 spaces.
RS.
It would be 2 spaces
Can't count off-street.
in the RS zone, which is
Is that 2 spaces per unit?
no,
2 spaces total.
and that's a state
Per
requirement now.
lot.
So that is not something we can change.
That's the minimum requirement, right?
2
We can
spaces per
make it
lot.
more restrictive, can we not? Yeah, we can make it more restrictive if we'd like. Yeah. But I mean, right now, we're running 1 per bedroom is our normal standard right now. And I don't really see a need to change that.
So I'm okay with the idea of excluding the RS zone from this requirement. I've had one other head nod over here.
Roxanne nodded too.
Okay, great.
Count the heads up there where the commission, the council is.
So
Nodding.
let me flip this.
They're the ones that count.
Unless there's a strong objection, we could have Sarah incorporate this change to the zoning code and move forward.
Move forward.
Councilor Lopez, did you have something?
Oh, I had a couple comments, but my key question I think has been raised by others, and I'm still not completely clear on it. What is the current requirement for parking in RS? I heard 2, but 2 per what? 2 per lot? 2 per?
Super dwelling.
So it depends
So-
on the housing type.
Your parking is not based on zone, it's based on use. So in any residential zone, the parking standard for a duplex now is 4 spaces. So basically 2 per unit in the duplex. Your parking standard for a single detached home is 2 spaces.
Okay.
And so
Oh,
we haven't
gotcha.
proposed any changes to the single detached standard. The duplex standard is reduced to 2 spaces instead of 4. That's the change. And that's in any zone where a
Unless-
duplex is allowed.
Unless you buy Bill's argument that we might want to go 4 for duplexes.
which we
Well,
can't.
And that's just kind of the standard. Go down to behind the stadium down there, that big complex is built. So that was one per bedroom.
Okay.
One parking space per bedroom, and even then it's violated because there's more than one per bedroom there.
Well,
So, I mean, but still.
you can drive up and down the streets and you'll find people parking on the lawn.
Don't see much of that.
I think
If you have a
Commissioner
lawn.
Cable has her hand up.
Yes. One thing that nobody's mentioned during this discussion is we live in a college town, and a portion of our population are college students who want to live off campus. They tend to their first time away from home, and I would venture to guess that more than half of the college students have cars. You go down Eccles Street, and it is towards the city offices. It is bumper to bumper to bumper to bumper on both sides of the street. The other thing is, I live down by Gentle Woods Park, and I travel along the highway on Myrtle Drive, which is only parking on one side of the street. And it is dangerous because there are lots of families with little children, and you often see them unloading the car, and the little child is standing by the corner of the car if it's not well lighted. I just think we need to take into consideration when we're talking about parking space that it is a college town with a lot of students with cars.
So we're almost out of time.
Can I make one more comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, just so I'm not construed to be totally unreasonable. If down south where we have the housing development down there, I can see where those subsidized housing where one car per bedroom is probably a little bit restrictive. I can see that. So I mean, if you're subsidized housing, there might be some room for play there. Because obviously if I'm in a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom unit and I'm I'm getting my rent subsidized already, I probably don't have 3 cars. So I mean, I can see where that, if I'm going to build that, where I might need some give and take. I can see that, but the rest of them, if I'm going to go out and build a complex here and put units out there, I think I need to be able to support a car per bedroom. I know there's people who disagree with that, but anyhow, I'll be quiet.
So I guess I would say that if you're concerned about congestion and traffic and lots of cars, you don't build more parking. You trigger what's called induced demand. You see this on highways too. You widen a highway, you get more traffic. You provide more parking, you get more cars. If you want fewer cars, you improve the pedestrian network, you support transit, you build protected bike lanes so that people have alternatives. That said, tonight, we're not asking the city to start spending on a whole bunch of infrastructure.
Where the state is not supporting us to do that, no.
But I think we've talked the street parking quite a lot. We're almost out of time. I think the last major issue in parking that I suspect is the reductions, other than duplex, which we're required to reduce, the reductions of parking spaces per uses in the residential zones. So I don't know if anybody wants to talk about those being adequate or inadequate in 5 minutes' time. Or if we can leave them as they've been proposed.
Go ahead, John. You're just dying to say something.
I don't know the answer. But, I look at triplexes and I think about what Donna just said. And we might have a 3-bedroom triplex where each unit is 3 bedrooms. And each bedroom has a student or 2, each with a car. So now we got a triplex that has 9, 10, 12 cars, and we're requiring 3 off-street spaces. And that triplex is on a fairly small lot, and it's right next door to another triplex, which is right next door to another triplex. which is right next door to another triplex in the street, doesn't have that many parking spaces.
Right.
You know, and that particular one, because I do know there are places in town already where we have multiple triplexes, and if it weren't for the fact that across the street is the post office or the side of another triplex or an apartment complex that doesn't drop so many cars into the on-street, you have a nightmare there.
We're not required to provide parking spaces for however many cars a guy wants to have.
Right. No, I know. And we can't, we're never going to guess exactly the right number.
Lower the better.
Well,
right. And while I'm in favor of I support your idea of fewer spaces means fewer cars. I go back to the notion that this is a rural community. We said it takes a family with 2 people working to afford these houses. And a lot of them leave town, and they don't do it on Chariot. Sorry.
Correct. And they won't leave
and
one
so
on the trolley
there are
either.
a whole lot.
Wow.
I've got neighbors that have 2 adults, 2 kids, and 4 vehicles right now.
Well, I worked for Chariots. I could ride for free when I did, and I never took the bus to work.
There you
So
go. And so it's the reality of the rural community that the jobs are often not here, and people have to commute to them, and so they need cars. At the same time, I totally support what you're saying. If we had a more fulsome mass transit system and off-street bike trails and everything else, I'd be all over trying to cut this down. We're not there. We're halfway there.
So
the trolley's going to be great. But
it's in town.
So the one point, let you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So we have 2 spaces for duplexes mandated by law. That's basically 1 space per unit, which is exactly the same as we have for triplex, cottage clusters, townhome. It's exactly the same standard applied to all the other uses here. So at least it's consistent, if that's worth something.
Well,
ding, ding.
that's the minimum standard. We can make
Right.
additional. We
Yeah,
can
that's
say
the
4 if we want.
Somebody could build more.
No, but we could say 4 parking spots for duplex if we wanted.
Can we? No.
No?
I keep seeing a head shake from the state.
Councilor Lopez has had his hand up for a while.
Sorry, go ahead, Councilor Lopez.
Cast iron.
Yeah, thank you. There was a question earlier if we were comfortable moving forward with this, and I just wanted to throw my 2 cents in there. I am comfortable moving forward with the table as it's presented, so long as we do exclude the RS zone from the on-street parking. From the on-street parking caveat, allowing that to count toward spaces. I think that strikes me as a acceptable and agreeable middle ground. Also, there was a lot of talk earlier about it being a college town. I went to college in a town about a quarter this size. And I rented 2 apartments while I was in that town, and one of them did not have a parking space with it, and that was difficult. I was a college student. That was difficult. I remember waking up at 4 a.m. to move my car so that the plow wouldn't take it out. Did I get value out of renting that place? Could I have afforded a place with covered parking? Gosh, I was also a poor college student, put myself through college. So, I think that giving multiple options and multiple routes is the key here, and making sure that the public welfare isn't hurt by those multiple routes. The flip side of the coin there is, in our town here, I think it was back in the 70s, I might have my era wrong, we did not require installing sidewalks for new builds, and we're still dealing with the repercussions of that. So, changes that we're making to this, not doing it with the RS zone, but doing that with the other zones, changing some of these things incrementally here. I think make a lot of sense, so that we can dial them back later if we need to. So all in favor of proceeding cautiously. And I'll step back from the mic now as well. And I think I saw Patty's hand up also there. So
I'll be really brief. I agree with all that you said, but I just wanted to add real quickly. I live in a predominantly single family neighborhood, but I can tell you that in many of those homes, because of the way the economy is right now, there are other adults living in those homes or adult children living in those homes. I housed my daughter and son-in-law for almost 2 years so they could save to buy a home. And we did have to park on the street, even though I had 2 parking spots with my home. And there are many families that are in that situation right now. And I feel very lucky that I own my home and that I have my own parking, but the way the economy is right now, it's pretty tough for people. And I just think that's something to keep in mind.
We are past 9 o'clock. Commissioner Howard, do you want to, how do we want to wrap things up? It felt like you were maybe trying to move in that direction.
So I think people are ready to call it a night. I haven't heard any specific suggestions for how to change this table. We've made some compromises around street parking. It hasn't actually formally been adopted yet, so people have our.
And there will be opportunity. Oh, sorry. Sound cut out.
So I think we can probably call this work session over.
Okay.
I would like to just say from the council perspective, thanks to planning, every time I look at this thing, and this is only part of it, I'm just astounded at what y'all have gotten done. And I want to thank you for your hard work.
You're very welcome. All right, so that is the end of the work session. We actually don't, since it's a joint session, we don't have anything else on the agenda. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. We are done.
Thank you all.
Good night,
Have a
everyone.
great
Thank you,
night.
Sarah.
Appreciate it.
Going towards Ash Creek Elementary.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever been to Hyacinth? That's the very last.
You know, I actually do too, and I
Yes.
wow, it's just like there's like
There are so many cars on both sides of the street in the, they're parked not only in the driveway.
something that is
but
on a wish list for every municipality that more people could afford homes, whether it's rentals or homes. So
that's exactly it.
no wrapped around